My name is Steve Hill. I am the Marketing Director for SCADA Software, Systems and Services at Emerson Automation Solutions. In previous videos in this series, we've demonstrated how to add an Emerson FB3000 RTU to the AUTOSOL ACM system and configure the system to publish FLOWCAL CFX files. As part of that configuration, we saw that the AUTOSOL ACM software automatically detected where to map RTU real-time historical alarm and event EFM data into the CFX file. Using an FB3000 with AUTOSOL ACM and using the meter configuration file, which is automatically generated by the RTU, you will find that the majority of the data is mapped into your CFX files automatically. However, in many cases you may want to include additional alarm and event data in the CFX file for a specific meter. This can be achieved using ACM event and alarm maps. And in this video I will demonstrate how to configure alarm and event mapping for specific alarms and events, and to show you a pre-configured template that maps a common set of alarms and events for a specific meter. So, let's get started. Before we look at the AUTOSOL ACM system, we're first going to take a look at the RTU and see how we're going to generate alarms and events for this demonstration, which we'll use for mapping when we configure AUTOSOL. So first, we connect to the RTU using the Emerson Field Tools and FBX Connect software. Once we've connected to the RTU, we're going to take a look at the configuration of Station 1. In our ACM configuration we created earlier, that station contains the first meter, a DP meter. If we then look at the flow rate alarm and generate some flow rate alarms, enabling and disabling them and changing the alarm limits, we'll be able to see those alarms and the associated configuration events being logged in the RTU. And then later we can see those within AUTOSOL ACM, and then we can change how those are mapped within AUTOSOL using alarm and event maps. So first we need to connect to the RTU, and then we need to look at the configuration of the station. We can then see that the flow alarm object is alarm 1801, and if we click the arrow we'll go to the configuration of that alarm object, and we can see from the red color this object is in a low alarm, it's a low flow. That's because the current value of flow is around 72 and the low limit was 100. We're going to change that to be 50, save it, and we'll see that the alarm goes away. That will be an out of alarm event that we'll see in the alarm log. And there was also the configuration event when we changed it. If we now disable scanning for that alarm, that will be another configuration event we should see in the log. And again we'll change the limit, make it larger, 150, and then we'll enable that alarm scanning again. We're doing this so it'll generate alarms and events that we can see in the logs. Having made those changes, we return to the station where we see that the flow alarm object is still alarm 1801. But we can then go to monitor events, and then let's take a look at the most recent 20 events. And if you look in the last few minutes, we can see that we logged both the enabling and disabling of that low alarm, and also the limit changes to 50 and 150. We can then close the event viewer and go to monitor alarms. And again we're going to look at the alarms, the most recent ones, the last 20, and we'll see that in the last few minutes there was alarms set and cleared for that station 1 flow rate. You can see there's some earlier alarms from when I was working with the RTU earlier, but the ones we're interested in are those ones at 1025 and 1026. Those are the ones we just created by enabling and disabling the alarm and changing the limits. We can then close FBX Connect and Field Tools. AUTOSOL has not yet been configured to map these alarms and events, so we should first take a look at the CFX files it's publishing and see what the data looks like. Remember, we typically need to wait until the end of the hour, that would be approximately 11 AM in this case, to see the completed CFX files. So we navigate to the folder where they're being saved, and then we look at DP meter 152. That's the meter that's in the station we were just configuring. And we'll open it with FLOWCAL's Show CFX utility, and we would expect to see events and alarms. But you'll see that there are no events and there are no alarms in this file. That's because those events and alarms we just created were not mapped to the meter. Instead, if we open the CFX file for the generic meter for this device, we will see the events. If we expand this window up, you will see that you can see the changes to the alarm limits and also the enabling and disabling of the alarm. These are the configuration events that occurred for alarm 1801 when we changed them in FBX Connect. These in turn, as we saw in the tools, generated an in-alarm and out-alarm event, and those were both logged on the Alarms tab in the CFX file. However, this again is in the generic meter. Typically, we want these in the CFX file for the actual meter which was affected by those changes. And what we'll do is show you how to change that mapping in AUTOSOL ACM. The next step is to open the ACM Configuration tool. Within ACM Configuration, we'll go to Pad 152, the folder that contains our device, and then do a right-click, Add, and we will add an EFM event configuration object. This is often called an event map. So we click that. I recommend changing the name to be more descriptive, and this is going to be the event map for the RTU FB152, so we'll just call it event map 152. Right click on that, edit, and use the form. Then click on the Details tab and click Event Configuration. I recommend using the tabular display, it's a lot easier. In this, each row is an individual mapping, and the record ID is a name that you add. It can be just descriptive, it doesn't have any effect. But then in the data service, you need to add the text that will be searched for in the event log to map these events. And if you recall, this was alarm 1801. So enter the text alarm underscore 1801 and then equals M. This means it will do a match. It will search for that text in the alarm and event history. And we're going to map that to run number 1 as it's the first meter in this RTU. You can actually edit in this form as well. I'm just showing the results. You then need to go to the device and then go to the Archive Settings tab and choose the event map we just created. And you'll see that's listed at the bottom. Press OK. And then save the configuration of the device. If you don't do that, the map will have no effect. Don't forget to save the map as well. After we've created the event map, we also need to create an alarm map. This is to map the alarms that were generated into the CFX file for this meter. So we'll quickly return to the generic meter CFX file and look at these alarms, and you'll see that each of them contains station_1 in the text for the alarm string. We'll use this to map them. We can then return to the Acm configuration, and this time we'll add the alarm map by right-clicking on the device and go to Edit using Form and go to the Archive Settings tab. Scroll down to the alarms, and where the alarm map is unassigned, click the button to the right with the 3 dots and then click Add. Choose the folder where this alarm map will go, and we'll use pad 152, and again change the description to match the function of this alarm map. And this is the alarm map for FB152, so we'll give it an appropriate name. Then go to the EFM Alarm Configuration tab, and again I recommend going to the tabular display. The record ID again is purely descriptive, and we're going to be adding the mapping for the station 1 alarm, so you can choose a name that's appropriate. But the important thing is the data service, and here we're trying to match the string we saw in the CFX file, which was station_1. So we say that's a match, and we're assigning these to run 1. You actually have an option to assign it to all meters if you wish, just by clicking that checkbox. Again, you can configure and edit this in a different window if you want. The results are the same. Close. And then you need to save the configuration. Select it, which is created here, press OK, and you can see that's been assigned here. You also need to save the configuration of the device, having made that change. Having made those configuration changes, we can close the Acm configuration tool, and we now need to go back to the RTU to test the work we've done by creating some more alarms and events and seeing if these are correctly mapped. So we connect to the RTU with FBX Connect, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing as we did before. We're going to enable and disable that alarm and change the alarm limits as well. This will generate both alarms and some events. So we move to Configure, Station. And this will display the configuration for Station 1. As before, we see that alarm 1801 is a station flow alarm, and clicking on the blue arrow will take us to the configuration for that alarm. And you can see in the description at the top left, it says that's a station 1 flow rate alarm. Currently it's an alarm because we have an actual flow of about 72, but 150 is the low limit. If we disable it, so the alarm is no longer scanned, it will come out of alarm. If we then change that value to 60, and then save that, that will actually have no effect on the alarm status because the alarm scanning is disabled. So if we enable it, that's a low limit of 60 as we've enabled it, but the actual flow is currently around 72, so again, no alarm will be generated. However, we change that to a far larger value, and then it's saved. Because 71 is below that, we're immediately in a low alarm flow condition. those configuration changes and those alarms will appear in the alarm and event logs. So first, let's look at the events in the RTU, and we'll look at the most recent 20 records. And if we're looking at around 11:30, that's the time we're doing this, you will see those changes. You see the value change from 6 to 60 and to 123. And then if we go look at the recent alarms, again on the monitor alarm screen, we look at the most recent 20 records, and we can see that around 11:30 there was a clear and a set of that alarm condition. So look at that at 11:30, that's about now. The early ones you can still see were at 10:30, they're in the RTU record. So we've confirmed that the RTU is generating alarms and events for that low flow alarm on station 1. So we can now close FBX Connect and Field Tools. And then if you look at the time, it's 11:30. So we need to wait until past the top of the hour and then go and have a look at the CFX files that have been published. So if we look, these were published around 12:10. And if we first of all go look at the DP meter 152 file in FLOWCAL show CFX. If you remember, this had no alarms or events before. But now we've done the mapping, we can see the configuration is still there. And when we go to events, we can see that those events, when we change the configuration around 11:30, the change to the alarm limits and the enabling and disabling of the alarm have all been logged and included. Similarly, the alarms that were generated as a result are also in there. And that is because the alarm and event mapping that we had added in AUTOSOL ACM configuration. Just as a check, we can open up the generic meter file and take a look at the same period, the configuration. There's no information there because it's generic meter, and we can actually see there are no alarms and events at that 11:30 time. The last ones are the ones that were created before we did the mapping. And the same is true if we go and look at the alarms. You'll see those are the ones created before 11:30 when we made the change. So we've confirmed that all of the alarms and events for that station 1 and for the alarm 1801 are now being mapped correctly into the DP meter 152 CFX file. So we've shown that you can map alarms and events to the correct meters using alarm and event mapping within the ACM configuration tool. In the example, we only mapped one alarm and one event, but it's actually possible to map multiple alarms and events. If we go back and take a look at the event map we just created, you can see how it's configured as a refresher. So we go to the form and then go to Details, EFM Event Configuration, and Edit Configuration in a tabular display. And here we see we have the record ID, which is really a description, and then the text that needs to be mapped. You can add additional lines in there, but we actually have files which are provided by AUTOSOL, which are the FBX templates. You may have seen me load these on the system in the very first video. So for example, this is for DP meter 1 in an FBX. And if we edit that using the form in the same way, go to Details, EFM Event Configuration, and if editing the tabular window, you'll see that there is a large number, about 16 different events that are mapped in here, and they're mapped in exactly the same way. This is an event map that's just got more records. And if you go to the tabular display, you'll actually see that in there is the station 1 and also some alarm mappings similar to the ones we just created. This is an example. You need to modify it for your application. And the easiest way to do it is to select the first couple of columns, copy them, and then open Notepad. Paste that information into Notepad, and you can then edit the text in here. So I'm just going to change a couple of the different mappings. So for example, we'll use the components to. That's a second set of gas quality components, and we'll use a different alarm for the flow rate alarm. Just copy that text, go back to your grid view, and using Control V, paste it, and you'll see those two changes are in there. You would then just save this map and then apply it to the RTUs where it's appropriate. And obviously you can keep that text file as well and have a different text file for each meter or for each site, however you want to do it. Usually you'd have one for each site if you've got different mappings, or you might have standard mappings across your entire system. But you can see it's very easy to do a bulk edit there and import those, export from a text file. Thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you're now familiar with the creation of alarm and event maps in the AUTOSOL ACM application, and how these can be used to ensure that the alarms and events end up in the CFX file for the correct meter.